Hello, this is an assessment of a Bluthner grand piano, 175 centimeters long, made in about 1876. So it's a very old Bluthner. It's probably only about 1%. In fact, I checked, and there's less than 1% of this age of Bluthner in the UK. 1865 onwards is more common, and then we go to the 1900s, where most of the Bluthner, early 1900s, 1890, early 1900s. And first of all, let's look at the casework, and you can see here it's rosewood and it's been repolished. That's we look at this side, and that's the colour it was when it was originally repolished, and it does show the grain quite well. It's a little bit darker than we would polish it, I think, because we want to show the contrast of grain. And as we look round, by the way, I think those legs are replaced. Certainly the casters are replaced. They're roughly the right style, or maybe they're exactly the right style for the age of the piano. I'm not incredibly familiar with this age of piano. I think I've only seen about 3 of them in the UK in all my piano dealing time, and compared to a very large number of later Bluthner grands. And looking at the top of the lid here, we can see how it's faded too. And in fact, we would try and go for a lighter colour, and perhaps this is slightly lighter than we would manage to achieve, but certainly it brings more contrast out in the grain. Now, if we lift up here, you can see the piano, this side's been exposed, and if I try and lift it up here, you can see there's the original polish underneath there. That's a stark contrast. Rarely see as contrasting as that, but you can see that since it's been polished, and I would say in about 1970, if it's been repolished at the same time as the work's been done on the piano, then that is a huge contrast. And that to me is a little bit too dark to show the contrast of grain, and you can see clearly the difference there. Perhaps we'd achieve in between those two to just, as I say, bring out this nice black contrast with a very light coloured grain. So rosewood is so extremely pretty, I think, that we really appreciate repolishing them, rosewood pianos. And here this is rosewood. So this age of rosewood also is extremely attractive. I just pulled this forward to show you that the candlesticks would stand on there in the days when there wasn't electricity. 1876 this is. So there's the music stand, very similar to much later ones, very similar to the ones up to about 1895, 1890 actually, and then they changed to be more plain. The key tops are in extremely good condition actually. I beg your pardon, sorry, they've been replaced. Well, they are in good condition, but they're replaced key tops, and if you look closely you can see there is a simulated ivory grain, but it's they're all the same as each other, so I don't know if you can pick that up on the video. And there are some keys clearly. This is very wobbly, this one. It wobbles backwards and forwards too. That means that the balance rail pin, the hole in the balance rail on the key has been elongated. That's not good news. You should never touch that hole really, just make sure it's tight always. So there's a bit of variety. That one's tight, but this one isn't. So that can be bushed if necessary. It's working properly, but it's something not, that is, I've noted on that's keys down a bit. I'm not quite sure why. But there are various mechanical things we'll look at in a minute. So that's the logo for Bluthner right through to about 1925, 1926. Very similar logo. This front rail, by the way, pushes down instead of pulls up. So if I push it down, it'll come off. But I've noticed the cleats underneath are missing. So there should be some cleats. I don't know if I'm going to show you the right place there. There should be some cleats there, and there's a hole where they were. Not that important because it stays up, and they normally do stay up, but it should be anchored with those cleats that come round and hold it tight. So if we look down here, we can push it downwards, this rail, and I can't do it with one hand. I've only got me here at the moment. This is in our storage area, as you probably noticed. I'm just pulling it down now, and you can see it is coming down. So I shall do that, and then we'll take the action out and have a look at it. Before we do that, let's look at the inside of the piano, and you can see this style of frame is typical of older Bluthners. I'm not sure when they finished doing that style, but the majority, as you see, look at other videos, bought and sold and restored many videos. It's many Bluthners, which is one of the makes that we particularly enjoy doing. So have a look at the underside of the lid. That looks very attractive too. So typical veneer, rosewood veneer, and the client really wants it to be more interested in the musicality of the piano. But I'm mentioning the case because that's one of the reasons we choose Bluthner. But they are very special tone pianos as well. See, it's been restrung. That's not the original Bluthner strings. They're totally different, as you will have seen on other videos. These are quite well replaced strings. Good string maker, good string line, as we mentioned before. And I'd say, looking at the colour of the strings, the restoration was done in about 1970. Well, let's say 1965 to 1975. So this whole frame design is different from the later ones. And this looks more like the struts that you get when it's semi-iron frame. Similar to Broadwoods as well. They have a very similar look to them. So let's just have a look at the tuning pins. Before we do that, I forgot to mention that you can see here the serial number 12296 written there on the very old Bluthner Grands, and that Paris Stimmung, I wasn't quite sure what it meant. It actually means Paris tuning or French tuning. Apparently it means French tuning A435. So below concert pitch. From my experience, it's better to have these at concert pitch. It makes no difference, doesn't damage the piano, and much more useful. We could always tune it to 435 if you wanted that, but if you're in the trade and like to comment on that, you might have strong opinions, so please do comment under the video. You can see 1876 is the last date here. The serial number suggested it should be about 1874, but here it clearly says 1876. Let's assume then that that's the age of the piano. Now the piano's been restrung without replacing the rest plank. By the way, this rest plank slopes downwards, as it does on a lot of these older German pianos, and that's quite common. So I'm not quite sure why they redesigned it to slope to be level, usually level anyway. But these older pianos very often have a sloping rest plank like that. If you're in the trade and would like to comment, I'd love to just learn things all the time. So these tuning pins are larger, obviously, than the originals, and they're nice and tight, which is very encouraging. Now, as you'd expect, it's got the original Bluthner patent action, which is like Bluthner's up to 1925. All the Grands have that unless they've been replaced, as far as I know. I've seen one or two very old ones of this age with, or at least one with a normal roller whip-and style action. But that's a bit of an exception. That was original too, I think. So I think, though, that certainly all the others I've seen have got normal, well, rather a patent Bluthner action with this L-shaped spring. We said that before. I've got another video of the contrast between that and the standard action in a piano, and just to see how that's regulated if you're interested. Looking at the hammers here, they've been recovered. You can always tell that because you can see a dirtiness about the wood here, an inconsistency as well. So they're recovered hammers, and well recovered, though there's one or two anomalies like this one here, which is not quite straight. It's obviously been replaced. The hinge is not quite, doesn't quite look like the right size either. And there's one other I found that's slightly higher. That's a more modern hinge, I think. And also that one is way back, so it's could do with being moved back in middle in that area of the piano. It doesn't make a huge difference to the tone, but obviously it's some perfection that we'd like to make. Well, and the checks, they're very worn there. We could do with replacing the checks, I should think. What if it comes to our workshop, if the client agrees to have the work done, it'd be a good idea to replace the checks. I think they're pretty worn and probably original and not been replaced when the hammers were replaced. Otherwise the action looks in pretty good shape. Now, the tone of this piano is very pleasing. It's got a lot of the Bluthner characteristic. It's slightly brighter, perhaps. These are new, recovered hammers. They're good hammers, and which you might have noticed that they're not very worn, which is encouraging. Let's have a listen to it. So there's some slightly bright there, but generally it's a nice full sound which you're looking for. And rich bass, perhaps not as rich as younger Bluthners, but very pleasant sounds, a bit biting. Some of these hammers could perhaps do with voicing. So that's a Bluthner grand piano, 175 centimeters long, made in 1876 approximately, and has a staggeringly beautiful tone, different from the younger ones, but it has its own beauty. So it's slight, could do with voicing the hammers round here. It's a bit too much bite, though that's a personal thing. You might like it if you're a jazz player, for instance. The touch at the moment certainly needs improving. The damping is coming off too early, the dampers are, to the keys, and they're not lifting high enough to the pedal. So that's something I didn't show. I'm sorry about that, I forgot to do that. Actually, I'll go back and show the dampers and probably put that on earlier on. So I hope that's been helpful. If you've got a Bluthner Grand you'd like restored, repolished, then please do write to us, info@robertspianos.com. It's a make that we're constantly working on. Thank you very much for listening. Now, one of the most important regulation items we've got to do is that the dampers, if we watch, I'm pressing the right hand pedal down, they're not lifting off enough, and they're hardly lifting off at all here if you look at that one. Just about lifting off. They should really lift off where the wedges here clear the strings by 1 or 2 centimeters at least. So, the other thing is that they're lifting off too early with the keys. They vary actually, generally a bit early, which makes them heavier to play. Obviously that's important, and also there's better damping if they lift off a bit later. So they're a bit varied. There was 1 or 2 that's very early, like that bass one there, the bottom one. So we do regulation to the pedals first, and then afterwards we regulate to the keys.